Okay, let's do that like thumbnail part first, I guess.
Little cameo. Hello everyone. Welcome to another monthly forecast. Today I have Sam joining me again.
Hey,
How are you doing?
I am wonderful. How are you?
I'm perfect. It's been a pretty good week. So before we get into our forecast for this month, how was September? We can do a little recap.
September was interesting. I always find Virgo season for me, Virgo and Pisces season is almost like my seasonal shift. So Virgo season and Pisces tend to be really heavy on my brain. Like I tend to dissociate a lot more. So I felt like I was floating a lot this month, just kind of like getting through things. The Pisces eclipse was like super duper loud, especially for escapism. Um, like I was fixating on watching YouTube videos for the past like 3 weeks, so I was in a totally different headspace.
Yeah,
Yeah.
swim in those Pisces waters. It'll get you.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
We're in the middle of eclipse season. It ends on October 2nd, is when the next eclipse is. So it's not going to be for the full month of October. It's really just it started September 17th, and then it'll end with the new moon eclipse on the 2nd. So eclipse season is kind of a crazy time. If you're watching this at the end of September or even early October, you might still be recovering from eclipse season. And the thing to know about eclipses is we don't have to overcomplicate it. They often just bring like inevitable changes and redirections. So like all these things that feel optional are no longer optional. We just have to make changes, or changes will be made, and we have to acclimate to them.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking a lot recently. Well, I've been watching a lot of Harry Potter first time reactions. I don't know why that's been my form of escapism, but the quote from the first book, I think it's Dumbledore that says it, but he says, "It does not do well to dwell on dreams and forget to live." And that stood out to me for the Pisces eclipse because I felt like we immediately moved into an Aries moon. So it's almost like the dream to action. But even on the flip side of that, it was like we go from escapism to like hyper fixating on the dream. And that can spiral us downwards or it can push us into change. I felt like I was noticing the latter a lot more. Like it felt a lot heavier to try to come out of the dreamlike state.
I just realized this fan is on back here, and I'm pretty sure we're gonna be able to hear it through all of this.
Are you? Oh no. If it helps, I can't hear it.
Sorry, what were you saying?
I was basically saying that that quote from Harry Potter, it does
Mm.
not do well to dwell on dreams and forget to live, reminded me a lot of this eclipse just because we go from the really heavy Pisces eclipse directly into an Aries moon. I think we had like an hour of a void moon before that happened. And it just reminds me of either the dream being turned into action or escaping through the dream and fixating on it because Aries is also a sign of fixation and like hyper focus. So if we were dwelling on dreams during the Pisces eclipse, we have to make that choice to either act or to like continue to fixate on the dream and forget to live. So I thought that was a really interesting quote for that Pisces to Aries moon that day.
Yeah, fully. And I feel like the that Pisces Aries is that what you said? I don't have anything to add to that actually. But I will say for September we had Venus in Scorpio and the Sun in Libra, so I feel like there is a lot of and Mercury in Libra as well, which happens today. We're recording on the 26th of September. And so I feel like it's bringing, Libra is obviously like the relationship sign, and Venus is kind of the relationship planet. And I feel like with Venus being in Scorpio, but the Sun being in Libra and Mercury being in Libra, it's bringing things in our relationships to light. And especially because we have eclipse season, it's kind of like these things are going to be very apparent. And the nodes, even though the full moon was technically in Pisces, the nodes were in Aries and Libra. And so the eclipse is going to be felt in those signs, I think more so even than it was in Pisces, because that's where the nodes was, and that's when, that's kind of what we base the eclipses off of. But yeah, especially with Mercury and Libra too, I feel like it's being able to see both sides of a situation and being able to have pleasant conversations.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm interested for all the Libra pileup that we're gonna have over the next little bit. It is in my ninth house, so it is a lot about astrology for me, which or it can be if I choose for it to be. So I'm excited about it. And yeah, I think when Mercury moved into Libra last night, I literally just laid down to go to bed, and this was at 4 a.m. Eastern time. So interesting, the house of dreams, and I decided to go to bed at that time, right?
Yeah, and it's funny, I noticed it today as I was doing that big puzzle of the planet Mercury. It was like a big picture of the planet Mercury. And then I was like, hold on, I think I just went into Libra today. And that's my seventh house, which is, like a spouse. And the puzzle was a birthday gift from my husband.
That's
So
awesome.
it's just kind of funny Mercury is already coming out. Do you have anything to add about September?
I think two things, and it's definitely about Mars. First thing is that literally, I think it was the day or two after Mars entered Cancer, Chapel Roan at the VMAs did that like medieval Joan of Arc drag, and
Mm,
she has a Cancer midheaven. So I thought that was perfect, like the perfect
mhm.
embodiment of that transit happening. And the second thing is also Mars. I was at a concert yesterday in Toronto, and right when the moon conjoined Mars, I think it was, a piece of ceiling crashed directly in front of me, my partner, and my friend. And I only know that the moon was conjoining Mars because I immediately pulled out my phone and screenshotted the chart for the moment. And I laughed so hard when I texted you immediately and I was like, this is ridiculous. But Mars is very loud. So
Oh, fully. Yeah, it's in my fourth house right now in Cancer. And I remember looking at the forecast for this week and being like, the moon is going to conjunct Mars. Someone's probably going to be arguing. And lo and behold, yesterday there was some conflict, but it ended up being really, really clarifying and really like a big relief. Like it was just so many things came to the surface and there was a little bit of a tough time with it, but for the most part, everyone was really receptive and focused on, how do we want to move forward? Now that everyone's on the same page, what do we want to do? So it was very nice. And I was thinking about it all day. I was like, I need to try not to argue today. I need to try to be gentle with my words because that whenever Mars is with the moon, it's just like sometimes people want to fight. But I don't know. I think being in Cancer too just makes it like nicer.
it's so interesting you say that because I was just thinking about how yesterday I have a really hard time with concerts and stuff. The tism just gets overloaded. But I found yesterday asserting my boundaries for what I needed in the moment was so much easier. And Mars is going through my sixth house. So yeah, it just felt so much easier to be like, no, I want to do this instead right now. You guys can do that, but let me do this. There were a few times where I like explicitly said, like, no, I don't feel like that. Can we do this instead? And obviously, my partner and my friend are so receptive to it, but it felt so different for me to be able to sit in my body and be like, oh, no, I need this right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird. I was just telling my roommate that I just did a tilt table test on Tuesday, and my cardio didn't want to order it at first. And I remember telling her, like, no disrespect, um, but like if you don't order it, I'm gonna go somewhere else and find someone that will. And so she was like, that's okay. If it's important to you, then we'll order it. It won't hurt. And so I got it. And so it's thinking about saying that is very intimidating and having to advocate for yourself in a medical setting, especially is can be very difficult. But it just felt very easy. Like it just felt like, this is what I need. This is what I want. Like I'm gonna get it, whether it's from you or someone else.
Speaking of the tilt table test as well as the first transit of the month, I actually have a tilt table test on October 2nd. So,
Oh,
yeah.
well, oh yeah. Well, with that being said, let's read off like kind of the most notable transits for the month, and then after that, we'll talk about like our general idea and just the patterns that we see this month, and then we'll also go by and go through each transit as well.
So we start off the transits of the month on October 2nd. We have a solar eclipse in Libra. On October 5th, Mars enters its pre-retrograde shadow, so it starts to slow down before it stations retrograde. On October 9th, Jupiter will station retrograde in Gemini, and the last time that Jupiter was in Gemini was in 2012. So this is a once in a 12-year transit, basically. On October 11th, Pluto is going to station direct in Capricorn. On October 13th, Mercury is going to enter Scorpio. On October 17th, Venus is going to enter Sagittarius, and we're going to have a full moon in Aries. We'll be out of eclipse season by that point, so that's just a regular full moon. On October 22nd, the sun is going to enter Scorpio. And on October 27th, Vesta is going to enter Libra.
Woohoo. So some pretty good stuff is happening this month. I think it's going to be a nice little change from eclipse season.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. A bit of a calm down after I think I'd say at least a week after the solar eclipse, it'll start to calm down a bit, hopefully. But I know eclipses just in general feel super heavy.
Yeah, there's been a lot of people I've seen in like Facebook groups and just on social media that are like, I've just been really nervous for the last week and I don't know why. And like a few people have tagged me in posts like, what's going on in the stars right now? Why is everything so crazy? And I'm like, it's eclipse season, it's eclipse season, it's eclipse
Yep.
season. Like we're halfway through it. October 2nd will be the eclipse, and then after that, it will start to simmer down a little. For the month of October, we have a lot of Venus and Mercury transits. They are going to be doing a lot. Venus is like I mentioned earlier, the relationship planet. It's about what we attract and how we attract and what we are attracted to, what we relate to, and Mercury is about communication. It's about pathways and crossing boundaries and knowing or figuring out how to get from point A to point B. So those kind of themes might pop out a lot one way or another. We also have a lot of water and air energy. There's going to be a lot of planets and water signs and air signs. So I'm thinking we're going to be talking and thinking about emotions, processing really big feelings, and doing a lot of self-reflection and also socialization with others. It doesn't feel like it's like we're all going to be in hermit mode. It feels like we're going to be having, go on a little walk and then we think of something and we realize how we feel and then we talk to someone about it and then hopefully they've had a similar experience and everyone is just realizing things and reflecting, and I'm thinking it should be cathartic.
Yeah, Venus is making a lot of transits to the outer planets, especially. And I was just thinking, like, I again, I was watching a reaction channel and they said something so interesting that one made me think of the Jupiter, Mars, Venus all in debilitated signs, as well as Venus conversing with the outer planets. It made me think of this quote that this reaction channel had said, and it was like, when you pray to God for courage or for strength, you're instead met with challenges and strife to fight through. It's not that you're just granted courage and strength, you have to actually learn them through experience. So I think a lot about that because Venus talking with the outer planets. The outer planets are older gods. They really don't care about your feelings. They just make changes when you ask for them, and it's not always in the way that you suspect, right? So with these debilitated planets, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, there's a sense of resilience to them, especially in the water and air signs that they're in. There's this emotional, mental resilience to endure the older gods, quote unquote, who are actually in water and earth signs. So it's more of a tangible reality that's changing. Yeah, just a lot of resilience that's kind of learned rather than theorized. So the actual, like you had said, it's not going to be more hermit mode. It's going to be more social, but I do think it's going to be a lot of external things to work through amongst other people, especially with all the water and air. That's a lot of connectivity right there.
Yeah, I think it's going to feel like a lot of experimenting and a lot of tweaking and practicing. And I think about like the word practice and how many different contexts it's used, and especially in the context of like medicine, where like medical professionals say that they practice medicine, not that they perform it or like 100% always know what they're doing. And so I think there's an important idea here that you can't like learn something unless it's through that experience that you learn things. And so whether it's a challenge or a strife or a conflict, that's how you get stronger, like Sam just said. So I like that a lot. I think that was a very good little note for this month.
Thanks. I think, yeah, I think Venus is very loud again, same as August. I know September was a lot more mercurial, which I think coincides with the eclipses being very cerebral, like a lot of internal kind of cerebral changes, and that sense of like dissociation and fuzziness and anxiety that people have been having. But now we're having another Venus month, which again is more embodiment, like you said. So it's that more like wisdom gaining through experience, especially with Mars and Cancer. I think of Cancer as the Chariot card, and the Chariot has made the decision, the lovers, to go forth and experience life with everything that they've already learned. And yeah, I think you're 100% right about this like experimental kind of month, especially with Venus moving into Sagittarius, who is kind of like the teacher, the alchemizing, the exploratory. Yeah, but I guess we can talk about that when we get to Venus and Sag.
Yeah. And I think it's worth mentioning too that while Venus is debilitated in Scorpio, it is making a trine to Mars and Cancer, who's also debilitated in Cancer, but because there's that line of sight and it's a supportive kind of relationship, and Mars rules Scorpio, and so Venus has like a direct line to the guy in charge who's like, I don't know exactly what I'm doing. Can you give me some advice? And he's like, yeah, totally. Also, while we're here, can you help me out with this? I don't know what I'm doing either. And so there's just this sense of like honesty around. I just had a conversation yesterday with someone, and I won't spill too much, but there's just been some miscommunication in some of my relationships lately. And just being able to sit down and say, like, this is new. I haven't had, every person is different. So even if you've made a lot of friends before or dated a lot of people before, each new friend or new partner or new relationship, friendship, whatever, will be unique in the sense that you've never had one with that person before. And so, just in my personal life, there's been a lot of themes of just being new to things and trying them out and being honest about where you're coming from so that, there's no pressure to feel like you have to be perfect or that you can't make mistakes. Because I think, when Venus is in Scorpio or when Mars is in Cancer, it can be like we can slip a little bit. We might get passive aggressive, we might get obsessive, we might, feel a little secretive and not you feel more reluctant to share. And I think that's kind of like the shadow side of those transits. But the really nice thing about it is once they come to light and, everyone's honest about where they're coming from, it's like, oh, you don't know what you're doing either. I don't know what I'm doing. We can just figure it out. And so, yeah, I think that's going to be kind of this month, especially while Venus is in Scorpio, is just kind of figuring it out.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But the first transit we want to talk about for this month happens October 2nd. It is the solar eclipse in Libra.
And that ties in that trine between Venus and Mars that you were just talking about, because it is a Libra solar eclipse. So the ruler of the lunation is Venus, and Venus is currently creating a grand water trine with Mars and Saturn. So we have Mars in Cancer, Saturn in Pisces, and Venus in Scorpio. So I had wrote that water is binding and connective as well as reflective. And although the malefics are involved with this, it almost feels like an emotional acceptance of the challenges and conflicts that come with change. I had also said that it's interesting that Mars is part of this because Mars indicates severance. So it's some kind of like cut that you're making or severance that you're making, like you're noticing what needs to go. But with Saturn involved, as well as the Venus kind of symbology of attraction and the water symbology of binding, it's
Mm,
like developing stronger or lasting connections and focusing on what is keeping things connected. So even though you're cutting stuff out, there's almost like a stronger binding to this other thing that you're putting more focus or effort into.
yeah, I really like that association with water and it being kind of like a binding agent because I mean, I just think like literally it's true. Like water absorbs things. It is something that can merge two different things and, kind of become something else. Yeah. And I think just to kind of add to that, with Saturn playing a part too, it almost feels like The things that are being cut off are things that might have been restricting. The things that are being severed might have been some kind of understanding that is no longer applicable to the situation that you're in. And so, you're trimming off some of the fat in your relationship to make room for the meatier, the juicy, the good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny you say that because the decan that the eclipse is happening in is Saturn's decan. It's the Three of
Mm,
Swords in tarot. And I had written that for Libra, the direction of movement is also forward and linear, just like Mars is. But I feel like with Saturnian's kind of feeling to this eclipse and the sense of restriction as well, it's like I'm going to stay on this path and accept whatever is coming forward to me.
mm,
And along the path, I'm going to have to make cuts and I'm going to have to make decisions. And I know that's going to happen. And Saturn is kind of like a somber reality check. It's like
mhm,
these things are going to happen and you're going to have to deal with them. But the good thing is that Libra is really patient and Saturn is about time. So it's
mhm.
kind of like this element of slowing down. And even though it's in the middle of eclipse season, it's almost like being able to see clearly, especially with the Mercury cazimi happening the same day.
Yeah. Yeah, and especially like this eclipse is happening in the place that Saturn is exalted in. And so I feel like it just kind of adds that, especially because it's a Libra sign and Libra is kind of being strengthened by Mars. And I think Libra is in turn strengthening Saturn. And so it is kind of somber. It is kind of, accepting what is, but it's not like, I don't know. I just think that we don't have to define ourselves by our low moments.
Mm-hmm.
Like we can do things and say things that are mean or hurtful or, sometimes abusive. And that doesn't mean that we are an abusive person and that's it. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that we're a bad person or that we're evil. It just means like maybe we're acting out of character and we need to look at all the different things that are contributing to that because most people that are, try to be mindful and I really believe that most people try their best, that no one is really like out there to make the world a worse place. I do think, some people maybe, but I don't know. I have faith in the world as a whole. And I think this eclipse is going to be a lot of how can we move forward knowing that we're capable of different things than we used to be capable of, and that the world is filled with different possibilities that it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so while it's changing and that change can be difficult, when we change with it, we open ourselves up to just so much more. And I think it's just going to be a time of kind of reflecting on the current version of ourselves, of where we're at now, not what has already happened to us, not where we've been, even though those are also parts of us, but where we want to go and how we want to change.
Mm-hmm. There's this like underlying theme of bridge building, which is very
Mm,
Libra, but I had wrote like restructuring plans for the bridge, like almost like the old bridge is kind of not structural anymore. We need to like repurpose it and make it fit more now. Or how do we bridge dreams to reality, especially with all of these really dreamy water signs, Neptune and Pisces being kind of the midpoint between Pluto and Uranus. It's like and then Saturn being in Pisces, like how do we take the dreamy stuff and the things that we want to be and want to do, and how do we bridge that with our current reality?
yeah. And I think it takes, like we talked about earlier, like a little bit of self-reflection and just getting an idea of what that image would look like and what that experience would feel like, and then actually putting it into action and communicating with others, this is the person I want to be. Yeah, just defining ourselves by our ideals and all of our qualities, not just like the negative ones or the bad ones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just to have like a little bit more balance because I think, I don't know, I just feel like there's some people in their head right now about where they've been and about what they've done, and it's not about that. The experiences you have now still contribute to the person that you are and the person that you're becoming. And so it's a time of becoming, not a time of already been.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'll leave it at that
Yeah,
for the eclipse.
sounds good.
Do we have any notes on Mars entering its pre-retrograde shadow?
I think just as any other kind of pre-retrograde shadow, it's sort of the layout of themes that you might experience through your Mars retrograde in Cancer. Things might start to like kind of go wonky, kind of similar to Mercury retrogrades, where you'll notice these things come back during the retrograde period, or they're things that you might have to work through continuously for the next few months. It's kind of a time of hinting at like what to expect over the next little bit.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning Mars is going to be in Cancer, I think, until February.
Yep, yep. End of
Mm,
February.
yeah, so it's gonna retrograde, stay in Cancer, I think, and then go direct and be in there for a while. So I don't think this is anything we need to worry about too much. Just if you know what Mars represents in your chart, keep an eye on those topics. If you don't, I just dropped my vape. You don't, then its general significations are conflict and advocacy and things like that.
Yeah,
So next we have the 9th. On October 9th, Jupiter will station retrograde in Gemini.
yeah. Yeah, I had just noted down that for me, it's kind of like retracing your steps or reviewing how small steps have contributed to the overall goal or dream. Because you have
Mm,
Jupiter, this like big planet of expansion, and then you have it in a mercurial sign that's concerned with like the details of things. So for me, it's kind of seeing how those small things have contributed to where you are now. It is a much more kind of internalized Jupiter period, as retrogrades always are. And Jupiter is still playing in that square to Saturn in a water sign. So, again, for me, it does reinforce this idea that contraction comes before expansion or regression comes before progression. So, it's kind of battling with that dynamic for the next few months until they leave that square, almost like an inner reflection for the growth of a mindset.
mm. Yeah, that's very concise and I think very helpful. I like what you said about all the little things adding up to the progress of where you're at now, because I think that's where Jupiter and Gemini becomes kind of treacherous, is when we look at the bigger picture and we're like, I'm not at my goal yet, but we've taken 100 steps to get there so far, and if we don't acknowledge that, then we will feel like we're at the same place we were.
Mm-hmm.
I have a silly little example for that. I have a goal right now of quitting smoking, which is funny because that's the lungs and Gemini is the lungs.
Right.
And for a few weeks, I was talking to my therapist, like, I just feel bad about myself. Like, it's something I don't like that I do, and I want to change it. And, it served a purpose for while I did it. But I would like to make some changes, and I'm frustrated that it's so difficult. And he was just kind of like, you just have to do it one day at a time and don't like focus. It's almost like look at the big picture and the small picture, like do what you can that day, but don't focus too much on that day. If you have a bad day, the next day might not be so bad. And if you have a bad 2 or 3 days, well, that week might have still been good. And so it's funny, I dropped my little vape, but I got a little nicotine this vape, and it has been very helpful for having the sensation of smoking something, but not getting that nicotine, from it. So, yo, those little things really add up. And even though it seems silly, like I'm getting a little vape, and I haven't quit fully yet. I'm still smoking. But I've cut back a lot, and I felt better just doing that. And once I learned, like, take it a few steps at a time, it takes the pressure off of things, and that added pressure to an already stressful situation is kind of difficult. But yeah, with Jupiter and Gemini and with its retrograding there, I wrote, don't talk too much. Like, seriously, try to slow down and think more. That is what I wrote verbatim. I've been spending a lot of time recently just being present, not being on my phone as much, just slowing down and thinking about some of the conversations that I've been stuck on. And it's been really helpful because then I can still go back and have a conversation with it after I have clarity. But if you're talking with someone or you've been talking with someone and it doesn't feel like it's going anywhere, stop talking and just start enacting change. You know, try doing something different. Yeah, otherwise I think we'll just kind of spiral when our words feel like we're not getting us anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. I think of like Jupiter being a giant and Mercury being like a tiny little Christmas town that people put along their staircases and just like walking through that, right? So like we have to mind our words during a time like that just because words are like swords, right? So just
Mhm.
without the S. So mind our words, mind how we're conversing with people and communicating as well. I also get this like watch kind of how much you're talking about something to other people because other people aren't entirely trustworthy. It does give me the air of like gossip because it is Gemini and Gemini is like about communicating ideas. So gossip does come into that. But with Jupiter there, it's super expansive. So if there's something that you know you should not be talking about, that should not be publicized or blown out of proportion, take a step back. Like, don't talk about that thing unless you absolutely know that it's okay to be talking about it because there's a possibility of it just expanding.
Fully. I think that's very good advice for Jupiter and Gemini is to be mindful of the words that you're using. Try not to over exaggerate. Try not to spread anyone else's business that doesn't want it spread because that's kind of been a theme. And if someone's under the assumption that you are communicating something with someone else, that is an appropriate time to communicate. Like it's not saying too much to so I think there can be an expansion of communicating in the sense that it's being, things are being relayed, but at the same time, also a caution there because Jupiter is considered to be not in the best position in Gemini because, like Sam said, it's a giant in a little Christmas town. And so we want to be mindful of the weight of our words. I think it might have been this week or maybe last week for the horoscopes. It was like someone else's secret doesn't feel as heavy to you if you're not involved, but you want to be mindful of that because the weight is still there.
Yeah.
So try not to step on any toes. If you do, be humble.
Yeah.
And if people step on your toes, try to be humble too. Try not to overreact or say too much. Like if they
Mhm.
apologize and they understand what's going on, they don't need to like
Yeah.
keep going, and you don't need to keep going either. We can just
Yeah, it makes me think of like just really quickly preservation. In a lot of neurodivergent people, we have this tendency to preserve an idea, so we keep reeling on the same situation. So when we think we might be over something, we keep talking about it. And
mm,
although that isn't like a value judgment, it's not a bad thing. It's just to be mindful of that might be a lot harder to deal with during this time just again because that expansiveness of thought. So it could be if you do have that tendency to self-preserve about a situation, just be mindful that that could be it. That could be how this shows up during this time.
mm, yeah. And it can be helpful and it can be problematic.
Yeah,
So we'll let you figure that out for your situations. Do we have any other advice, thoughts on Jupiter and Gemini?
I think that's all I've got.
All right. So next on the agenda, we have October 11th. Pluto is going to station direct in Capricorn.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh, Pluto. Pluto's kind of an interesting planet. I think some of its significations can get a little confused because it's often seen as the ruler of Scorpio, which traditionally is ruled by Mars. And a lot of people, sometimes myself included, have trouble differentiating between Pluto and Mars.
hmm
And so I think it's worth mentioning that Pluto is like the god of the underworld. It is like the ruler of the change, the ruler of death, the ruler of transformation, of the other side. And it's stationing direct, and whenever it stations retrograde or direct, but it's direct in this case, it's going to be very collective. Like it's
yeah,
not, I mean, it might feel personal, but it's going to be very collectively. It's not going to be, one little event with you. It might be have a bigger scope.
yeah. I found it funny that it coincides with Canada's Thanksgiving weekend, and that's basically the initiation of like holiday season up here. Yeah, because we have Thanksgiving, then Halloween, then we have Remembrance Day on November 11th, and then we have Christmas. So for us, it's a very like holiday season initiation, which I
Yeah.
found super duper funny. But I've also noticed that during the time that Pluto's been retrograde, a lot of like government sanctioned violence has been really explicit during this time, especially with the Uranus retrograde too. But like I've noticed that that's been a really big thing recently that I've been seeing. So once it stations direct, I'm interested to see if any like not retribution. What word am I looking for? But
Justice or like even just a
reparation or
yeah,
something. Hope I doubt it very much just because it is government sanctioned, but like
yeah,
I'm interested to see what happens after that, especially coming to the state's election season. And I think Canada is on track for potentially calling an early election. I've been hearing little whispers about that. So interested to see where this goes with the stationing direct and then eventual move back into Aquarius for good.
yeah. And let me look up a date.
Okay.
Yeah, it just brought to mind because you mentioned government sanctioned violence, the protesters, and how they're being treated very poorly
Yeah.
and violently.
Hmm.
And I am hoping that with Jupiter's retrograde even and with Pluto stationing direct, that like you were saying, some kind of reparations or some kind of justice can come from that.
Yeah.
It's been kind of surprising too, and maybe this will be, I'll be interested to see if Jupiter and Gemini changes this, but it feels like it's also been, like the media has just been very dodgy in the sense that there are a lot of things just not being reported at all,
Yeah.
like anywhere, that are pretty major world events that for some reason I'm not seeing very much of.
Hmm.
So I'm wondering if with Jupiter and Gemini going retrograde, if maybe some things might start being uncovered in the media.
It's really funny you say that because we go from October 11th at Pluto station to October 13th, where Mercury enters Scorpio. But right before
Mhm.
Mercury enters Scorpio, Mercury makes a square to Pluto. And that's like an uncovering of some sort of information. Being in Libra, there is a sense of justice there. So it does feel a bit too little too late, but still there's that Mercury excavation of something Plutonian and Pluto being direct and Mercury being direct just I believe coming off of Kazemi, not like maybe 2 weeks before, but it just feels yeah, feels like information coming to light before Mercury enters Scorpio.
Yeah, totally. And that's a really good segue too to October 13th, Mercury entering Scorpio. Because it is very things coming to light. It's very, I wrote investigative and intimate.
Mm-hmm.
It's, things people might not want to be known might be coming out. And so Mercury is going to be ruled by Mars while it's in Cancer. And so I think it's definitely going to be emotional and a lot of feelings are going to come up.
Yeah, I always get this when I think of Scorpio, I think of this sign that's able to sit in very deep, murky, kind of like uncomfortable settings. Scorpio very often just spends time in the dark and doesn't mind being there. Funny enough, I do think of like not entirely this character, but I think of Hagrid from Harry Potter, who's like always around these really dark, big, gross creatures, and he loves them and he cares about them, and he doesn't really understand that people don't feel the same way. And it just reminds me of Scorpio being able to feel things that not everybody else feels because of how deep things go. There's almost like a willingness to learn and understand fear or other really deep
Mhm.
kind of taboo emotions. And Mercury as the psychopomp already, like being able to transverse boundaries, it's like this resilience or this bravery almost to transverse and go into the really murky, gross parts of the world. I also think very much of the occult with this transit, like with Mercury and Scorpio. I think of being able to see omens or signs and have this like deep connection to them or getting to the bottom of things or yeah, like really fixating or obsessing over things. And again, no value judgment whatsoever, but that like obsessive fixating investigative nature to Mercury and Scorpio is what I'm interested in trying to harness to in my own practices.
No, fully. And I like what you said about fear because I feel like that is one thing that most people experience. I
Mhm.
think everyone does. Maybe some people it's more apparent than others, but I don't know, maybe that's why Scorpio was able to kind of understand and feel for the misunderstood because, it understands.
Yep, yep.
Not the most
Yeah.
eloquently put, but it's there.
No, I know what you mean. Yeah. People are intimidated by Scorpio, I find, just because they sit with all of that. They can kind of understand the darker parts of people. That's why I find that they're so loyal to the people that they are close to,
Mm,
is just because they're like, I know this person whole, like I know their
yeah,
whole being. And I've weighed again that Libra pre-tense to Scorpios, like I've weighed the good and the bad in this and what I perceive it to be, but I'm willing to accept all parts of this person.
totally, yeah. And I really like that, especially with what I mentioned earlier about kind of accepting every part of ourselves and about how there are parts of ourselves that might have hurt people
Mhm.
and how we don't get to just disown that part of it and it be, just our shadow side and then that's it. Like it is part of us and it is not the only thing that is part of us.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, I really like that. One of the other notes I wrote is that direction and progress is not linear. Sometimes the fastest way to get somewhere is to slow down and enjoy the ride.
Yep. Yep. And when I read your note on that, I thought of I forget who it was talking about the sign of Scorpio and how it's like a basement leak. And every time I tell people that, they laugh. And it's because water in a basement leak, one day it's there and the next, or one day it's not there and the next day it is. And it's like this idea that water can seep through anything and always
Um,
get to the bottom of something. So
mm,
when I read your note on that, that's instantly what I thought of, is this like slow, meticulous drip down to the bottom. Like we will get there. We will.
mm,
Just you wait, but it's coming. Like
yeah, and
mhm.
it'll find if there's any cracks, it'll find them.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, especially with Mercury being there, it might not even be a torrential downpour, but there will be some water and
Yeah.
cracks will be revealed.
Mhm.
Do we have anything else to add to Mercury and Scorpio?
Don't think so.
All right. So then our next transit we're going to talk about is October 17th. We've got two this day, two big ones. The first one is Venus is going to exit Scorpio and enter the sign of Sagittarius. And then we're also going to have a full moon in Aries. There's kind
Mhm.
of a lot of Mars energy this month. I didn't really consider it too much.
Yeah, I'm realizing that now. It's very fiery, Marsy. It kind of shifts from that Venus to Mars energy, which is interesting.
Yeah. Well, we can start with Venus and Sag.
Cool. Yeah.
I don't have a lot of notes on it. I mean, you had mentioned like building bridges earlier, and I wrote, don't be too picky about who is using the bridges that you're building, because if
Mhm.
it's something that you can use that will make your life more convenient, maybe you have to pass by someone that you dislike, but that doesn't mean you're not going to where you are going, and it doesn't mean that it's worth it to the extra inconvenience of going out of your way.
Yeah, I read that and I wrote underneath, I'm like, Ray's note makes me think of this. It was, I instantly got this image of like an old boomer going like, well, if I had to suffer, then so should you. Like very
Mhm.
like this dogma of suffering. And I think dogma is a good word for Sagittarius sometimes, because they like Sagittarius is concerned with what feels true. So this like dogma that suffering happens, but that's what your note made me think of, is like just be aware that not every you don't have to suffer every single time, not
Mhm.
everybody has to suffer. But I do think that Sag is very much Venus being in Sag is very much an exploratory period.
Mhm.
Venus has gone through so much the last few months, and now she's finally entering a space where she's peregrine, so she's not in any debility or dignity for the next little bit. So she's kind of just cruising through and exploring things. And the bridge has been built in Libra, and now she's able to transverse lands and kind of experience. And that's also what Sag is to me, is like searching for the experience of alignment. So this to
Mhm.
me is a period of just like celebration, and let's explore this new way of being, and let's try new things, and let's try new ways of connection.
Yeah, yeah, totally. It makes me thinking about this straw man boomer that wants people to use the bridge. It does remind me of how I'm starting to get to the point where I'm old enough that I can go back to somewhere that I used to live and be like, oh, this is different. Like that used
Mhm.
to be there, that used to be there, this used to be something else. Um, and so I think it can get easy to think of bridges that we've crossed in the past and to kind of project that as a good route for everyone.
Yeah.
There might be some construction on that route now that there was not before, where it could have just fallen apart and it needs, some maintenance before it can be used again, or maybe something else should just, maybe a different path altogether is better. So, you know, don't be too picky about. So this is as on the idea of it being an exploratory phase, like there's more than one route to get to where you need to go.
Mhm.
And that is
Yeah.
the beautiful thing about Mercury is it knows how to get from point A to point B, and it knows 10 different ways to do that. It's not just black and white. And I think that's what's going to be really exciting is being able to stay flexible and keep in mind that like progress, not only is it not linear, but also it can be made in more than one way.
Yeah. 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 I'm excited for Venus to go into Sag. It feels like a nice little acceptance of mistakes type of
Mhm.
period. It feels like mistakes are much more lighthearted at this point.
Yeah, totally. And that's actually a really good transition into the full moon in Aries.
Yeah.
I put that paving the path takes a lot of effort, but it makes it easier for everyone to navigate it in the future.
Hmm.
And so whether that's about conflict, because we're talking about Mars, or about just being the first to do something, keep in mind that it makes it easier. If you go to someone and you open up to them or you initiate a more vulnerable conversation, it opens that path and enables them to feel comfortable to do the same thing with you.
Hmm.
And I actually get to talk about Juno for this
Yeah.
one, so I'm excited.
I love your note for this. I think I laughed so hard when you first wrote
I
it.
I was trying not to immediately jump into it, but the Juno is going to be conjunct the sun at 24 degrees of this full moon on what day is that? The 17th. So get ready for a hot Juno fall. Fall is starting and Juno is going to be there. I think Juno moves at about 2 degrees every day. So when it's conjunct the sun, it will stay, the sun moves, excuse me, about 1 degree a day. And so when they're near each other for a minute.
Right.
Um, and our Juno is all about our commitments and our responsibilities that are shared with other people. And they're so much more manageable when we share them and we view them as something that is shared rather than just one person doing all the work. And there's so many different kinds of care and work to be done in relationships that two people with very different skill sets can be perfect for each other. You
Mm.
had made a comment about something being different,
Maybe something being different.
something about people being different than us. I don't remember what it was though. But it was reminding me of one of the other kind of aspects of Juno is being treated poorly and having grace about it. Having tact, having poise, having couth.
Because you can't spell it either.
S- And so, yeah, I don't know. It just feels like a time of forgiveness, not for the sake of forgiving, but for the sake of mending and honoring a commitment that you both are making to each other even if one or both of you doesn't exactly know how to do that all the time.
Yeah, I had wrote for my full moon notes, I wrote Venus plus Mars equals opening the heart and Sag equals exploratory. So, yeah, as you're saying that, that's what I'm thinking of because we have this axis between Libra and Aries. So it's like this balancing between the two binaries, like the two opposite ends of the binary. So I wrote down like the self versus the other and personal choice versus mutual choice, autonomy versus coexisting, courage versus consideration, competition versus cooperation, and then action alone versus action together. Um, so when you're talking about commitments and how you were able to share commitments with people, that's what reminds me of that access between like self and other and how do I integrate this with the other or with the world around me. And there is a mutual reception because Mars is in Cancer and then the moon is in Mars's sign. So it's almost like this embodiment of that energy. So it does feel kind of like a jolt of energy or like a lot of energy in the body, is what I would say. Maybe at sweating that day, if that makes sense. Like the Mars in Cancer to me is very much sweat, especially with that square to the moon. So it feels like if you need an outlet, do something that will make you sweat.
Mm.
because that Mars energy in the middle of like all this Venus Mercury stuff is going to feel so overwhelming, more on the body than anything. So I would say maybe like do something like in cool, like a team sport or something with another person. Go to the gym with your partner, like do things with someone else that makes you sweat. It's kind of like the embodiment of Mars.
Fully, yeah. I think I'm gonna do yoga with my roommate.
Do it. Yeah.
And it's gonna be in my Mars is in my fourth house, so
Nice.
I think it'll make sense. Yeah. And I think when we share that experience with others, it makes it easier and kind of keeps us accountable for what we're doing. I did also write for this new full moon. Today is a good time to check in with where you're at, accept responsibility for what you can handle, and accept what you can't handle so that you can negotiate within your established limits.
Yep. Yeah.
So do something that makes you sweat. Don't overextend. Don't do too much. The
Yep.
goal isn't to exert yourself or exhaust yourself. The goal is to process things and,
Mhm.
find a good way to do that.
Yep. Yeah, I have Mars and Saturn in Aries, and my dad is also a Saturn in Aries, and he has a son in Aries too. And my dad and I bond all the time over the fact that if we've been doing something for a really long time and we're expected to teach someone else to do it or hand off the commitment or responsibility to someone else, it's really hard for us because the way that we do it is the best way. And
Mm,
trying to teach someone else that experience is so like hard to kind of verbalize and like walk through because we know the direct way to do it. But I think it's definitely a lesson to be able to learn how to hand that off to people. So like a couple years ago, I was training some new staff, and I could not figure out for the life of me how to train them on these things because I just knew how to do it, and it was very hard for me to translate it. So I ended up figuring out that I could just make videos of me doing the thing and talking through it. I uploaded all those to the Google Drive, and that's how I ended up training some people. And it worked so well for me because I just did it and then talked about it. So it's like finding that way to share the responsibility, to share the commitment, to share with other people in a way that works for you.
yeah, fully. And along the note of like kind of accepting our little quirks, this reminds me of my husband. He's a Cancer. And so he's a big caretaker. He loves doing all the dishes, making all the food, everything he can. And one of his struggles since we've had a new roommate has been sharing the responsibility of things. Allowing our roommate to clean or do certain things because it's his responsibility and he wants to take care of it for everyone, but then he's so overwhelmed. So it just feels like a way to find like one of the things that they mentioned, we're a household of three people with OCD. So we've just got to find what works for us, understand where we're coming from and why we're coming from there, whether it's rational or not, because sometimes that nervous system is just going to do what it wants to do.
Yeah.
And one of the things he kind of talked about is like our roommate doing the dishes when he's not home. Is there are certain OCD triggers along cleaning and doing the dishes that, he's not just trying to be difficult. He's not just telling our roommate to back off and that's his stuff. I mean, there are reasons for it.
Yeah.
And so we've talked about different things for how to work around it. And that was one of them is like, if you can do them when I'm not home, I'm not gonna be thinking about it. I don't feel like I'm gonna need to hover. I'll be home and then it'll be done and then it'll feel good.
Yeah, it's so wild that you say that because that Venus, by the time we have this full moon, Venus hasn't entered Sag yet. Venus is
Mm.
just coming out of the underworld and she's conversing with Pluto. And then the full moon happens, and then we enter this exploratory phase of Venus coming from the underworld. And that's what I think of as like, how do we like explore different avenues of doing this thing, like coming out of a very rigid kind of fixed way of doing something? How do we explore new ways of doing that thing and sharing those responsibilities with people?
Yeah. And, that can take a little bit of humility. It can take a little bit of openness to change and allowing yourself to have a different role than you have now. I don't really have anything else to add to Venus and Sag or the full moon. Do you?
Nope, I think I'm ready to move forward.
We think we'll have October 22nd. We're gonna have the sun entering Scorpio.
Yep.
So yeah, just kind of adding on to what we talked about earlier, it feels like some paths have been paved, whether it was during the full moon or Mercury in Scorpio or just any point during this month. There's a lot of opportunities for creating new pathways and evaluating which ones we want to use. And I think the sun entering Scorpio was just gonna, it's like trying to navigate a forest in the dark. Even if there's paths, they might not be clear. And when the sun rises and then, it's daytime, we can see all of the different paths that we can take. So yeah, I just think the sun is gonna bring more visibility to a lot of the things that we talked about earlier. It's gonna make maybe we'll find language for things that we didn't have before because it's also going to be illuminating Mercury a little bit since they'll be in the same sign. Yeah, what are your thoughts?
I was actually thinking about this when we were talking about Mercury entering Scorpio, and I had read your pathway thing, and I thought, oh, that's interesting because Mercury is already there creating paths. So when we were talking about Mercury entering Scorpio and how kind of this learning from the darker parts of us, or the quote unquote darker parts of us, and learning from mistakes, I thought of the fact that the sun does have a decan in Scorpio, and it is the second decan, and it's this element of nostalgia. So sometimes nostalgia is painful and it is dark, and revisiting the past is hard, but we can learn from it to learn healing in the enlightenment. And again, the sun is a central force. So if the sun is finally meeting up with Mercury in this really dark place, it's kind of like the sun being able to align with those parts of the self that we've uncovered. So when you say like the paths are clear now, it just makes me think like, yeah, like Mercury finally has that light of the sun to be like, okay, I'm ready now. Let's do this. Like, let's go forward. You've made the little zips through the meadow, and I think we can find like a good course of moving through this. And it obviously, this coincides with like Halloween season every year. So that's why the idea of ancestors and ghosts in the past come up. And I do think with both Mercury and the sun being in Scorpio, it's just this illumination of those parts of ourselves. And is also, I think, tend to be why mental health tends to have a harder time during this time of the year, is because we're really coming to terms with those deeper parts of ourselves that may be painful and uncomfortable, but eventually we, find peace with them.
Yeah, totally. And I think Scorpio season might be where the darkness starts to become equal with the sun or with the amount of daylight
Yeah, yeah, I think you're right about that.
because the days were longer during the summer and then they start getting shorter. And I think this is when it's like, okay, darkness is starting to have some they're starting, it's starting to become equal. It's not like we're in full winter or full summer. We're taking the good and taking the bad, the comfortable, the uncomfortable. Something I read recently, actually, a quote was that discomfort is at the root of all growth and learning.
Yeah.
And I think even like the example you gave with making the videos on how to train someone at work, like you making the videos and being in the discomfort of like, I don't know how to communicate that. I know how to do, I mean, I know how to do this, but I don't know how to communicate how they can do it. And that being kind of the Mercury and Scorpio and then the sun entering Scorpio, like I made these videos for you. Like, I sat in my discomfort. I didn't know how to do it. And then I found a way. And then now it's visible. Now you guys can actually access it and do that the same way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's it for Sun and Scorpio, unless you have anything else to add.
I think I'm good. I'm very excited for spooky season. Bring
And
that Scorpio sun.
there's going to be, we want to go to this event. There's like a few different attractions. It's like a haunted house. I think there's two haunted houses, but there's like a haunted bus ride on the way there.
Ooh.
And like the top of, it's like a school bus and the top of it is sawed off. And they'll have people like jump out of the trees and like into the bus, like while it's on the way there. So I'm excited for that. I've
Cool.
never been. My
Wow.
physical therapist was telling me about it.
Oh, very Venus and Sag.
Yeah, very, very spooky season. So
Yep.
we'll see. I think it's at the end of it, it's like a haunted corn maze or something.
Nice.
It sounds fun. But
Yeah.
next we have October 27th. Vesta, the asteroid goddess, is going to enter the sign of Libra. With Vesta, not everyone always knows what that is, so I think it's worth kind of clarifying a little bit. Vesta is known as like the hearth fire, and there was a group of people called the Vestial Virgins who were responsible for maintaining certain rituals, and one of them was a sacred fire, like a literal fire, and it would be in the middle of a city, and it would represent like the heartbeat of that city and the core. And if that fire were to go out, it would be representative of, the people in that city dying. And so I think as an asteroid, it kind of symbolizes our core, like our heart, and the rituals that we do to maintain what is sacred to us. And with it entering Libra, I think it's going to be about honoring those things that are sacred to us and to others, and reconciling two different parts of ourselves and making peace with like kind of inner hypocrisy. Because as far as I know, they're going to the hearth fire is for everyone in the city. It's not just for the good people or, the upper class. Like it is representative of the entire city. And so I think it's gonna have some themes of honoring, what is sacred to us, what is sacred to others, and that just kind of being it. Like not no nitpicking, no force of beliefs or anything like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. It comes at the end of the month too, after like this kind of deep dive into the dark parts and trying to like uncovering information with Pluto and all that stuff. Like it's interesting Vesta goes into Libra at that point to be like, okay, how do we actually create like the balance between these parts of ourselves? I had gotten the image of like how do we balance like creating a sacred space amidst war almost? Like when there's so much just challenge and difficulties and strife and like dark things going on in the world, how do we still continue to maintain balance with sacredness? How do we create those safe, like sacred spaces for ourselves when we don't have a physical place to create those spaces? It is an air sign and it's not really tangible, it's more mental, but like where are those mental safe spaces, sacred spaces that we have for ourselves? My Vesta's in Taurus, so this is definitely gonna like what's it called? What's the word? Oh my gosh. Trigger? What's the word?
Oh
Activate.
yeah, yeah.
It's gonna activate all my Venus houses. So yeah, I'm interested to see what happens. I know my Vesta it is in an earth sign, so I do find physical like being in nature actually tends to make me feel a lot more safe in my body. So I'm interested to see how this works with the like with it going into Libra and being aware of it this time around.
Yeah, totally. I was double checking where I have Vesta in my chart because I didn't remember. It's a Scorpio, it's in Scorpio.
Nice. Oh, I love
Mm.
our opposing Vestas.
But yeah, I mean, I like what you wrote. I think it sums it up really well. How do we balance creating a sacred space amongst the chaos and strife of the world? And yeah, I think it's worth mentioning maybe that sacredness and the concept of something being holy doesn't have to be attached to a specific religion. It can be unique to your situation and your belief system. And it's just something that you respect and honor, in a way that you might not respect and honor other things
Yep.
on a much deeper level. And for me personally, I think kind of divinity is found in other people, and especially with this being in Libra, I think it is going to be a lot of, finding people that share the same beliefs as you and being able to relate on a really deep level that there's mutual understanding, and whether you agree or disagree, you're still honoring each other and seeing each other. And I think it's a pretty good transit to end the month with.
Yeah. There is one more transit I just want to mention on literally on Halloween. It's Mercury trine Neptune, and it's Mercury in Scorpio trine Neptune in Pisces retrograde. And I saw that and I'm like, that is the most perfect transit for Halloween, especially if you're trying to do ancestral work or like some sort of occult practice, because the transgressing of boundaries, that energy is so loud. Like Mercury, the psychopomp being in Scorpio, and then Neptune being in Pisces, they're both very otherworldly energies. And with such a strong trine happening between them on Halloween, I think it's perfect for any type of occult work, ritual work, ancestral work, like definitely more avenues of connection between our world and other worlds.
Oh yeah, fully. I like that. And I'll be curious to see, because we were talking about new pathways opening up. I didn't think too much about spiritual pathways or spiritual beliefs or directions that we could go, but I'll be really curious to see if that is part of this month.
Hmm.
I think if I were to generalize everyone in a really big way, I might say that some people choose to live like a spiritual life or follow some kind of a spiritual path, and other people choose not to. And both are valid choices, both are good ways to live. They just tend to have different motivators
Yeah.
and inspirations. So, whatever's sacred to you, whether that's your financial stability or your spiritual freedom, we'll find out and we'll
Mhm.
respect it and hopefully communicate it in a way where other people can respect it too.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's about it for this month. Do you have any final thoughts?
No, I'm actually pretty excited for October. Like after we chatted the last little bit, I'm like, this is gonna be a really interesting month to go through. I'm excited to see how all of the transits play out. And yeah, I'm ready for Halloween. It's my favorite time of the year. So
To do you have anything coming up? Any classes, workshops, anything? And where can people find you?
definitely still find me on Instagram. I think for the month of October, I am going to be doing a bit more behind the scenes work just to get some projects started. I need to harness some hyperfixation, but you can definitely find me on Instagram at Dorsum Rising. I do have the link to my services in my bio, and I'm offering two more focused style readings too at the current moment. So I'm doing a moon focused reading where I want to just specifically focus on the moon in your chart, and I'm also doing like a big three style reading. So if you want to just talk about your big three as opposed to your birth chart, I'm offering that as well. And I am helping out on the board for Astrology Toronto. So if anybody is interested and is in the Toronto, Ontario region, you can definitely sign up for a membership. We have a really great full day workshop happening in about a month actually at the end of October on October 26th. I know it's the Huber method with Faye Blake in the morning, and I believe it's locational astrology in the afternoon. So you can attend online. So if you guys are interested, just go to the Astrology Toronto website and sign up to join.
Yeah, I'll try and put a link in the description to your socials and also to Astrology Toronto.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, do I have something going on? A little bit.
Your
I did just
ebook.
finish. I did, yes, my
Ebook.
ebook. I did just finish my first ebook. I made one. It's called What is Astrology Foundations? Sam was actually very helpful and encouraging in the process of making it, so thank
So
you.
good. It's so good.
Yeah, it's 40 pages long. I have a historical timeline, some background info, what is an astrology chart, like the different parts of it, explanation of different types of astrology. If you've been studying for a while, you might learn something new.
Yeah.
And if you are brand new, then I don't think it'll be too overwhelming. It'll be like a really good introduction.
Hmm.
Yeah, you can find that on my website. I'll put the link in the description. I am going to be doing a class, offering it as a virtual class. I just need to set a date for it.
Ah,
So I'll put more probably in next week's forecast or so and keep everyone updated.
so exciting. Yay.
Very exciting. Yeah. So yeah, well, thank you for hanging out with me today. That's
Yeah.
it.
And scene.
Well, everyone stay safe, have fun, and we'll see you next week and next month.
Happy Libra season.
Be Libra season.